Welcome back to my salon. I am Joe Brunsman, insurance broker of the stars. Today we're talking about what goes on when clients won't listen, a discussion about liability waivers for MSPs. All right, before we jump into it, this is my latest book, Damage Control, Cyber Insurance Compliance. That is where you can download it for free. Now let's look at some type of scenario here. Let's say you're an MSP. Hey, we offer multi-factor authentication, MFA, for you, dear client, to be safer. And the client's like, nah. And then you're like, next meeting, you go, hey, you should really implement MFA. It's really affordable. It's not a big deal. It's easy to implement. And the client goes, nah. And then you go, hey, this 6 months later, you meet with the client again. You go, you know what? This could be a legal requirement, really could protect against a large percentage of attacks. There's this new study out from Microsoft saying that it avoids, 90-something% of attacks. You should really implement this, Mr. and Mrs. Client. And they go, no and never. And then you are sitting there as the MSP just pulling your hair out, going, why won't you listen? It's so easy to do. You're being so dumb. Well, what do you do then? Well, let's talk about a liability scenario, right? Kind of dovetailing into this. So you now think the client's at a much greater risk of some type of cyber event that could occur at their business. Should you, one, fire the client, just disengage from them entirely? You may be sitting there going, you know what? The risk is just too high with these people. We're not even going to deal with them anymore because we don't want to get sued because they didn't want to listen. Or maybe you're going to try and get the middle ground. You're going to go, well, you know what? I'm going to have them sign a waiver of liability. So that way, if something goes wrong that could have been avoided if they just would have done what I told them to do, it's not going to come back on my business. Well, there's a little more to that. So first of all, we can generally classify these as something called exculpatory agreements would be the legal term here. And there's a whole bunch of different types of exculpatory agreements. Probably the one you're most familiar with is like the end user license agreement, like click wrap, shrink wrap type agreements. But there's liability waivers, indemnity, hold harmless agreements, disclaimers, et cetera, et cetera. Now, waiver of liability, here's an example for you. Ooh, that got bright fast. What does this essentially say without having to read all that nonsense over there? It's, hey, I warned you. You acknowledge that I warned you. You know that this could be bad. You are going to accept the risk anyways, and you are not going to hold me liable because of this risk that I'm making you aware of. That's kind of the gist of the elements that go in to that type of release. Now, are you in the clear? So far, this sounds like a really good idea. Well, not necessarily. It really just depends. So there is a balance. Now, in this particular circumstance, these scenarios that I brought up, okay, that's one thing, but let's look at the broader picture here. They're trying to balance the right of recovery versus just businesses operating in the world. And the courts have been pretty clear when you look back at the record that it's very difficult to strike this balance. But they're trying to say like, hey, if you are providing some type of service, you can't just, waiver your way out of every potential risk that could befall your business because of that means you're not going to take the risk seriously, or there could be situations where it's just within public policy to make you liable for certain things. So it's not just as simple as, hey, sign this, I'm in the clear. That doesn't mean that liability waivers are worthless, but it doesn't mean that that they're necessarily bulletproof. There's a lot of middle ground there. So what's the general enforceability? This is what I think you really need to grasp onto as an MSP. This is very, very important. Foremost, here in the United States, it really just appears to be state specific. So a few states, they're generally just unenforceable. If you're within those states, I'm very sorry. Some states, just pretty easy going. Seems like the courts are pretty lenient unless it's just something completely outrageous. And then other states have very strict requirements on what the wording has to be, what those terms have to be, how enforceable they are. There's all of these little nuances that go in to these types of waivers. Now, some possible voiding elements, some things that could potentially get you in trouble here. Once again, depends on the states, depends on the circumstance. If this exculpatory agreement or this waiver of liability if it's just too broad, if it contravenes public policy, if there's willful or wanton misconduct. A lack of clarity falls within a public interest exception, lacks conspicuousness. Allegations of gross negligence can generally not be voided away. Same with reckless conduct, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you can see that a lot of this is going to be very fact pattern dependent and dependent upon the state, and very much dependent upon not only where your MSP is located, but potentially where your clients are located. Ergo, check the venue of your contracts. That's going to be very, very important for you. What is the venue of the contract? It essentially says, hey, in the highly unlikely event of a dispute, both parties mutually agree that the dispute will be, let's say, litigated within this particular jurisdiction according to these particular laws. Obviously, that's important if liability waivers have very, very state-specific requirements in them. Next, please do not borrow your buddy's liability waiver or their contracts, because a lot of this just depends. A lot of it just depends. So yeah, you can get a template. I'm all for that. That's perfectly fine. I have nothing against that. But you're going to want to take that template before you just throw that out into the wild. Highly recommend you consider speaking with your business attorney to make sure that everything's on the up and up there, so that you're not inadvertently and in good faith putting something out there that's going to go back and get you burned. On that note, you may also want to speak with your insurance company before you do that, just in case there's some nuance there within your particular insurance contracts. And of course, as you'll see here, there is a reason that attorneys get paid what they do. And so make sure that, hey, worst case scenario, you have that proper tech E&O, not cyber insurance. In 99.9% of cases, if you're an MSP, it's a tech E&O insurance here in the US, and all other appropriate businesses insurance. And work on defense in depth for your MSP. So if you try to do this liability waiver, this exculpatory agreement, it turns out that somehow they wiggled around that, you're still going to want that defense in depth, multiple areas of risk management and risk transference, so that you can try and push back against those claims when you can reasonably just sit there and go, I told these guys this was a bad idea, they didn't listen, and now I got a lawsuit. You want to have firepower on your side. And just remember, increasingly, and don't take my word for it, I say this all the time. I should have prefaced with this. What are the big brains, the big dollars saying? There's a reason your insurance is going up. There's a reason that entire insurance companies simply will not offer tech E&O insurance to MSPs anymore. They're saying the risk is going up. It's going to be too risky, or hey, we got to crank up the premiums here because we're anticipating that it's only going to get worse moving forward. So don't just listen to Joe, the bubble, here on YouTube. Make sure you're just kind of looking at the broader social trends and broader insurance trends here to see that I'm not just blowing smoke at you. With that, I'm going to link above if you want to learn about some more considerations on risk management, risk transference, and defense in depth for your MSP. All right, with that, if you found this useful, if you learned something, if you just like listening to my very calming voice here, please like, share, comment, and subscribe. If you have any video topics, please let me know. I try to put out a new video every Thursday or so, depending upon the workload. All right, so up above me is going to be another video for you if you're still here. And over there, if you click on my beautiful face, you can subscribe to my channel. With that, stay safe.